Was the sound of Cherry Audio's Crumar DS-2. My name is Tim Shoebridge, and on behalf of Cherry Audio, it's a huge pleasure to be able to introduce to you their latest product. DS2. Now, I've got to admit that before I started researching for this video, I knew very little about this synth. It's quite a rare synth, especially these days. It was originally released in the late 70s, 77, 78, that kind of time frame. It's an analog synth, but the DS in DS2 stands for digital synthesizer. That's because Crumar used some quite groundbreaking technologies inside this synth. It used digital technology to enhance the capabilities of an otherwise analog synth. And we'll get onto the details of that a little bit later on when we look at the oscillators. But for now, let's take a look at the front panel and have an overview of what the DS2 really was. Right, here is the front panel of Cherry Audio's Crumar DS2. It looks beautiful, doesn't it? There's some rather interesting graphics going on there with those sliders. Let me show you a photograph of an original hardware Crumar DS2. And you can see the similarities with the front panel. I have to say that that original hardware synth sitting inside its own sort of like purpose-built flight case, it looks really, really impressive. It looks like a really beautiful synth. So with the Crumar DS2, we've learned that DS stands for digital synthesizer, but what about the 2? Well, the 2 stands for 2. It's 2 synthesizers in one. You know, it's a similar concept to the Arp Quadra being 4 synths in one and the Korg Trident being 3 synths. Well, with the DS2 we have 2 synths. We have a mono synth and a polysynth as well. Now if we look at Cherry Audio's version of the DS2, we can see that they've color coded things for us a little bit. Most of that front panel, we've got orange borders around the groups of controls, but you can see there the green group of controls. That is the polysynth itself. So at the moment we are listening to one of the oscillators in the mono synth. We're listening to this one over here. There are 2 oscillators and they have their own individual volume controls. So if we want to introduce oscillator number 2, we turn it up there. But if I turn them both down and then go over to the polysynth section and turn that one up, that's the polysynth. So let's go back to the monosynth section for a moment and those 2 oscillators, because remember at the beginning I mentioned that Crumar had implemented some rather groundbreaking technology for the time in their original DS2. Now if you load up this DS2 from Cherry Audio and you select a triangle wave and then just play some lower notes, you'll hear something which really does stand out. There's some really interesting aliasing going on there, some kind of sort of like higher harmonics introduced, and you can hear it in those lower notes. It reminds me just a little bit of a tone wheel organ, a Hammond B3 or C3 with the leakage and the cross talk that goes on, and which you can hear it in the lower notes. Let me see if I can show you what's going on here. I'm going to load up a little analyzer, a little oscilloscope, so we can see what the waveform looks like. Let's just play a note, and you can see there this fascinating stepping here. Let me just sort of like zoom in, or zoom out rather. There you go. That's the triangle wave. It's a stepped triangle wave. Now apparently, and I don't know the exact details here, but apparently those steps, there are 32 of them, and they are in memory, like samples. They're values, 32 values that map out how to draw that slope. And so what the DS2 is doing is it's picking those values and applying them to generate triangle waves and sawtooths as well. So it's almost like a very, very primitive single cycle sample that's being held in memory and then being applied to the triangle wave and to the sawtooth. And that's why we're hearing those overtones. If I choose a sawtooth, you see the same stepping. One more peculiar thing to show you with these oscillators is the pulse wave. So as you can see here, we've got sawtooth, triangle, we've got square wave and a pulse wave. Pulse wave sounds like this, and we can change the pulse width with this control here. You can hear there as I'm turning the dial, it's stepped, and that might be fine, okay, but it actually is still stepped if you use, say, an LFO to modulate the pulse width. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to switch to LFO number 1, and let's turn up the dial. It's a really cool effect. Let's speed it up. There's a little bit of vibrato it introduces as well. The pitch is changing. Right, before we move off of the oscillators onto the next section, there's just a couple of things I want to mention that are where Cherry Audio have added functionality that wasn't there in the original hardware synth. The first thing to mention is oscillator sync. There was no hard sync in the original hardware synth. They've added it here for us there. And the second thing to mention is that they've added a sine wave to oscillator number 2. Now, oscillator number 2 in the hardware version of the DS2 just had 3 waveforms. It had sawtooth, triangle, and a square wave, no pulse wave. Cherry Audio have added a sine wave, and they've added it to be in harmony with the rest of the DS2 because it looks and sounds like this. They've added in that stepping there, so if the original DS2 had implemented a sine wave, it no doubt would have sounded like this. On on to the filter section. We have a rather lovely sounding 24 dB 4-pole low pass filter. It sounds like this. It's got that creamy, dare I say, Moogish kind of sound. Let's whack in a bit of resonance halfway round. The resonance doesn't really do much until it gets quite far around the clock, so let's go around sort of 3/4 of the way round. You can hear that there's a lot of bass drop off as we turn the resonance up. Bit more. It does self-resonate. And Cherry Audio have added a keyboard follow option. It wasn't there on the original, but with keyboard follow whacked all the way up, we can play it. They've also added a 2-pole option, so we're listening to the 4-pole right now. We've got this switch here, we can switch over to the 2-pole. We've also got a polarity switch, which wasn't there on the original hardware DS2, and the polarity switch is in relation to the envelope generator to basically invert it. So we have an envelope generator here. It was just a standard ADSR on the original hardware DS2. Here, well, like with all Cherry Audio synths, they've added a velocity sensitivity control, which is on the end here, the V. But they've also added at the beginning a D, a delay, so you can delay the onset of the envelopes. That's really, really useful. And they've also added the ability to loop the envelopes with this repeat switch down the bottom. Right, just going to briefly mention the VCA section before we move on to the stars of the show, in my opinion, which are the LFOs. But first, VCA section, not a lot to say about it. Cherry Audio have added velocity sensitivity like they did with the filter envelope. They've added the delay portion at the beginning of the amplitude envelope, and they've added repeatability, loopable VCA envelope, something like this. Right, so onto the LFOs. Now, in the original hardware DS2, there were 2 LFOs, and that was pretty unusual in the 70s for a monosynth. Cherry Audio have gone one step further than that. They've given us 3. If 2 are not enough, we've now got 3. They've also actually enhanced the LFOs quite a lot. Now, in the original hardware synth, there was a rate control. There was a set of waveforms that you could choose, and there was a delay control for both of the LFOs, so you could delay the onset of the LFO. What Cherry Audio have done is they've added all of these switches across the top here, so we can sync our LFOs to clock. We can re-trigger, like reset the phase of the LFO when you hold down a note. we've got the ability to just have a one-shot LFO, so just turn it into a basic envelope generator. And they've also given us the ability to invert the signal, turn the waveform upside down. That was not on the original DS2 either. So we've got tons of modulation capabilities here with these three LFOs. Now in terms of what you can modulate with them, that's where we look down the left-hand side here. And this sort of section of the front panel was dominant on the original DS2 as well. Now on the original DS2 there were 5 of these. Here we've got 6. There were 6 on the original DS2, but the 6th one, this bottom one, was situated over on the right hand side. But basically what we've got here is like a little modulation matrix for LFOs. So we can choose which LFO is our mod source. With this switch we can choose LFO number 1, number 2, 1 and 2 together, which is really cool. I'll show you a demo of that in a second. And with Cherry Audio's version, we've got LFO number 3. So you choose your mod source, which LFO you want as the modulation source. The modulation destination is here. So we've got the pitch of the polysynth. We haven't talked about the polysynth yet. We'll get onto that one later. We can modulate the VCA level. We can modulate the filter cutoff. We can modulate the pitch of both the oscillators together or the pitch of them individually. So those are our mod destinations. And then the modulation amount is the slider. So I mentioned before that it's really cool that on the original DS2 you could modulate with both LFOs number 1 and 2 together. So I could just give you a little demo of that. Here I've got the modulation source set to 1 and 2. We're going to modulate the filter cutoff. And with Cherry Audio's version, because you can sync to clock, it's really easy to get some interesting syncopated kind of effects going on. So I've got both LFOs number 1 and number 2 synced to clock. They're running at different rates, and we get this kind of effect. So, with these LFOs, do we have anything interesting with the waveforms like we do with the oscillators? And yes, the answer is yes, we do. What Crumar did with their original DS2 was take that stepping kind of capability that they built into their oscillator waveforms, and they've provided it in their LFO waveforms as well. They provided it in LFO number 2, and with Cherry Audio we've got LFO number 3, and Cherry Audio have provided it there as well. So we've got this special waveform which looks like a staircase. Okay, we've got a nice little arpeggio going. Let's add some delay and a little bit of reverb. Now let's see what we can modulate with our LFO staircase waveform. You'll see there, LFO number 2, it's synced to clock, and we have the staircase waveform. Let's try modulating filter cutoff. You'll hear it fading away as it cycles round its steps. Let's try something different. Let's modulate the pitch of one of the oscillators. Now you'll see that oscillator number 2 is currently hard synced to oscillator number 1. Let's try modulating oscillator 2's pitch. You get some interesting sync tones, but they're quite subtle. And the reason for that is, as we'll see here, that the octave of both of the oscillators is the same at the moment. Let's drop down by 1 octave the pitch of oscillator number 1. We get some lovely woody tones. Let's try 2 octaves. And maybe 3. Okay, that's getting a little bit atonal, quite FM-ish. Let's go back to just 1 octave down. And while we've got this arpeggio playing, maybe we should try modulating the pitch of oscillator number 1. That might get a little bit weird too. Yep, very weird. So let's continue with modulations. I'll come back to the LFOs in a second, but first I just want to talk about this section here over on the left hand side. It wasn't there in the original DS2. It's become kind of mandatory in Cherry Audio instruments, just like the multi-effects chain bus that we have at the bottom. Over here on the left hand side, this is to do with modulations. It's to do with touch modulations. We've got the ability to set up 4 different modulations where the source, the modulation source, is aftertouch. That can be mono aftertouch or it can be poly aftertouch. And so we've got a control for setting the amount of modulation, positive or negative, and then we click on this little assign logo here, and we've got all of these destinations available to us. And this is kind of standard stuff now on Cherry Audio instruments. Take it for granted almost, but it's so powerful in terms of its modulation capabilities. Now I'm mentioning that now because, as you can see, when you hover over the assign little logos there, they change color, saying click on me please. Now, in terms of the LFOs and the LFO modulations, I had been running up Cherry Audio's DS2 for a couple of days, and I've been playing around with it, getting to know it, writing some music with it, and I thought it was amazing and brilliant, even if these modulation destinations were the ones that were there, because that's what are on the original DS2, so I took it for granted that that's what you had. But as you can see, as you hover over them, they change colour, and if you try clicking, you get all of that list of modulation destinations up that you have for the touch capability there. There's well over 30 different destinations, including effects destinations as well. And when I came across this was like a eureka moment. It was like an oh my goodness, now what can I do with this synth? This really is absolutely brilliant because we've got 6 modulation sort of buses here. 6 rows in a modulation matrix with over 30 destinations each, and the source is the LFOs, the 3 LFOs, either individually or in combination. It's really cool. Okay, finally, it is time to look at synth number 2, the polysynth. Now, before we get there, I just want to sort of like refresh your memory. Remember what the waveform looked like for the sawtooth on the monosynth? That stepped waveform looks like this. Well, this is what the waveform looks like on the polysynth. Mega steps. Big steps. Now, it's not using the same technology as for the monosynth. It's not using that kind of single cycle 32 values, single cycle waveform thing in memory. It's using divide down technology, so it is true polyphony. I think on the original DS2 there were 44 keys, so we had true 44 key polyphony using divide down technology. But the actual waveforms are also constructed somehow out of this divide down technology. I don't know how it's done. I think they combine waveforms across 3 octaves somehow, and they come up with this. So it's a very buzzy sawtooth, big buzzes, lots of extra harmonics in it. And that makes it good for kind of string machine kind of sounds, especially if you combine it with the sawtooths of the monosynth and then slightly detune everything. You get lovely string synth kind of sounds. So here's a nice string synth patch. Let's see how it's made up. You'll see that I've got the polysynth and both of the oscillators of the monosynth playing. Each of those oscillators, the 2 monosynth oscillators and the polysynth oscillator, are being modulated by an LFO. In terms of stereo, the monosynth is being played as a polysynth. In fact, I've got it going through the multi-option play mode. We'll cover that in a second, but that gives me a really wonderful wide stereo spread. As for the polysynth itself, we can pan it left and right, but I'm using this really wonderful panner effect. Right, it's time to talk about play modes next. Now, obviously the original Crumar DS-2 from the 1970s was a monosynth and a polysynth combined. But Cherry Audio's version, thanks to the magic of technology, like Cherry Audio love to do, they love to take a monosynth and allow us to play it polyphonically, and that's exactly what we have with Cherry Audio's Crumar DS-2. We have the ability to have a polysynth and a polysynth combined. Here are the play modes that we have for the monosynth section. So far in this video I've been playing the monosynth as a monosynth, but we can play it in unison mode, we can play it in polyphonic mode, which is up to 16 voices of polyphony, and we can play it in multi-mode. This has been introduced before in some previous Cherry Audio products. This is simulating polychaining. So we've taken here the monosynth engine and we've got 4 instances of it, and there are different ways that we can combine those 4 instances. We can play them all together in unison mode, we can play them polyphonically, so handing out different notes to different instances, and then we've got some cycling modes as well, and each of these 4 instances we can change the pitch, the pan, the filter cutoff and some of the VCA envelope settings individually to come up with some really wonderful and huge stereo effects. Whatever we are doing here in this multi-mode with the monosynth section, 4 instances of it, we can then combine with the polysynth. So with so many LFOs and the ability to be able to modulate pretty much anything with an LFO, I thought I'd try modulating the rate of one LFO with another LFO. Look at the little LFO LEDs to see what the effect is. So here we have LFO number 1. It's synced to clock and it's playing a square wave and it's modulating the pitch of VCO number 1. LFO number 2 is also synced to clock. It's playing a square wave, but it is modulating the rate of LFO number 1. Now there's a little stutter going on there as well. I've added that on top of the LFO modulation using this wonderful pulsar effect. It's synced to clock also. You'll see there are 3 steps that I'm muting. Now in terms of playing the monosynth and the polysynth together, we can layer them, which is the normal way that the DS2, original Crumar DS2 played, but we can also split and have overlapping regions. You'll see here we have got this little section above the keyboard where we can drag the ends of these regions, so we can have an overlapping region, we can have regions where only one of the synth engines is playing and where only the other one is playing, or we can actually have a region where nothing plays. You've got infinite possibilities here by dragging these little lines just like this. Very, very simple. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the video now, but there's just 2 more things I just want to mention. I'll mention them as quickly as I can. There's probably things that I've forgotten to mention, so I apologize for that. But out of the 2 things I can remember, first of all, this arpeggiator section in the middle here, this arpeggio section, should I call it. It wasn't there in the original hardware synth. Cherry Audio have added it. It's very, very powerful. We've got the chance and the feel controls, which Cherry Audio have added to previous instruments. It means you can get some really interesting effects out of this section here, not just your typical arpeggios, but some really quite interesting and cool effects. In terms of the routing, we can arpeggiate the monosynth on its own, or the polysynth on its own, or we can arpeggiate both of them together, so it's very flexible from that point of view. Last but not least, I want to mention the multi-effects. So we have these wonderfully flexible and incredibly powerful effects chains. They are standard now in Cherry Audio products, and as you can see here, we have 3 separate effects chains. We've got one for the monosynth, one for the polysynth, and then we've got a global effects chain that sits on the top. Really, really powerful. That's it. That's all the time I have. This is Cherry Audio's Crumar DS2. It's an incredibly wonderful and deep modulation monster of a synth. Please do check it out. Until the next time, as always, thanks very, very much.